The Jets played poorly on Saturday night against the Giants, and Justin Fields played poorly, and now everybody is overreacting. There's no need for panic. Let's discuss why today on Locked On Jets.
You are Locked On Jets, your daily New York Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome. This is the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It is Monday, August 18th, 2025, and I'm your host, John B. from GangGreenNation.com. Thanking you so much for making the show your first listen or first watch every day. And a big shout out to you everydayers. This is a daily podcast covering the New York Jets with new episodes each day through the week, Monday through Friday. Today, we are here to recap a Jets preseason loss. The Jets were blown out on Saturday night by the New York Giants. The final score was 31-12. We'll talk about some roster battles that may be impacted by that game. We'll talk about things that we learned from this Jets preseason loss, because there were a couple. But my first message to you is relax. There seems to be a panic that has set in throughout this fan base over a bad performance team-wide, and in particular, a bad performance by Justin Fields. Again, the Jets were blown out. They lost 31-12. Fields' final stat line was ugly. It was 1 for 5 for 4 yards. That is not what you're looking for. It's one thing to say the Jets played poorly and Justin Fields played poorly. It's another thing to say that this is significant at all. This, in many ways, was the most predictable thing in the world. The Jets played great week one of the preseason. They played at a level that was going to be very difficult to sustain through the entire 3-game preseason. It was inevitable the Jets would play not as well in week 2 against the Giants. And after maybe we got a little too excited about the way the Jets played against the Packers, the team came back to earth against the Giants. This stuff is pretty natural. Now, I think that there are a couple of things to remember here. Number one, the standings don't count right now. Jets winning and losing games is not that important. These games are all about getting ready for the season, figuring out your position battles, figuring out your roster battles. Jets are not game planning for these games. They are not focused on trying to exploit the other team's weaknesses. It's a different story when we get to week 1. If the Jets can't succeed when they're actually trying to attack other teams' weaknesses, then we can discuss being concerned about this team. But the guys who decided this game on Saturday night are generally not going to play a big role for the 2025 Jets. And this goes back to one other key point. I think we should have known the Jets were probably going to lose this game pretty handily, and there's a very simple reason for that. When you get deep into these preseason games, you get to the second, third quarter, the defenses are not very good. You don't have guys who are starting level talent. You also don't have guys who have a lot of chemistry. They don't have guys who can communicate well. You don't have guys who have played together, and it's also August, so guys are rusty. So all this leads to really sloppy defense. And the Giants had a first-round quarterback in Jackson Dart. And when you're facing a first-round talent in those situations, they're generally going to be able to see when a defense busts a coverage. Whereas the Jets had Adrian Martinez and Brady Cook. And no disrespect to Adrian Martinez, who I think has improved, or Brady Cook, who I think showed signs of progress between week 1 and week 2. But first round pick in Jackson Dart's going to be able to exploit it when Jets defense breaks down. And all 32 teams are going to have breakdowns when their backup third string defense is in there. Then you get to the third and fourth quarter, and you're dealing with guys on defense who are even lower on the depth chart. So you're going to have even more breakdowns. And the Giants have Jameis Winston in there, who's got 89 starts. You can put a guy with 89 starts in against the third, fourth quarter preseason defense. He's going to look like Tom Brady. So the Giants were always going to win this game big. And you have to remember, it was a competitive game when the Jets starters were there. It was 7-3 when the starters left. It was 7-6 at the half. So if you want to use the final score as a reason to think the Jets weren't competitive in this game, well, the guys who weren't competitive aren't really going to be playing. And it was to be expected because the Giants were playing guys at quarterback who were a step above Jets defensive players. Now let's get to Fields. And much like the Jets team overall, I'm not going to defend Fields' performance. It was 1 for 5, 4 yards, but there are a couple things to remember. Number one, it was only 5 pass attempts. Nobody should have gone crazy when he played well against Green Bay a week ago and he had a bunch of checkdowns. That stuff is not that important. It was only one series. Here he had a couple series, and he was 1 of 5, and he had 4 yards. And again, like that wasn't that great. But do you ever judge a quarterback on 5 pass attempts? Like, let's get to week 1. Do you think like anybody's going to care about a 5 pass sample size when we evaluate Fields' game? No, we're going to evaluate him over 4 quarters, but you don't get 4 quarters in the preseason. So you're evaluating these guys on like these super small sample sizes. You would never like say 2 drives in a regular season game matter all that much. You're more focused on the entire game. At the end, you evaluate a player, you evaluate the team in the regular season after 4 quarters. You don't evaluate them on 5 pass attempts. So that's number 1. Number 2, I don't think we learned anything new about Justin Fields on Saturday night. And that's the thing about these preseason games. I focus on when we learn something new about a player. We learned nothing new about Justin Fields. Justin Fields is who he is. We know what Justin Fields brings and what he doesn't. In the NFL, I think that there are like 3 groups of quarterbacks. You have your tier 1 guys, and these are the guys who will make it work if everything's going well around them, or even if things aren't going well around them. They will lift everybody up. And that's, your Mahomeses, your Lamar Jacksons, your Josh Allens, your Joe Burrows. Then you have group 2. You have the guys who, if everything around them is working well, they'll look pretty good, but they can't really respond to adversity. And then you have your tier 3 guys who are guys who just really can't play. And even within these tiers, I think that there's a hierarchy. So like at the top of tier 1, you have your Mahomeses, again, your Allens, your Jacksons, your Burrows. At the bottom of tier 1, maybe there's a guy like Jordan Love who can do it, but not as frequently, not as consistently if things aren't working. You see flashes of it. Then you have your tier 2, where I'd say maybe a guy like Tua Tagovailoa is at the top of the list because when everything's working well in Miami, he functions that offense at a super high level. And when things aren't working, they kind of struggle. He's not horrendous, but you could tell that he just can't transcend his circumstances. I think Fields is at the bottom of tier 2, where if everything's working around him, he's capable of a big game here or there. He's capable of decent play, but when things aren't working around him, it's a big problem for him. If Fields' first read's not open, it's an issue for him. If the offensive line doesn't protect him, it's an issue for him. If the snap is off target in the shotgun, he's not going to be able to overcome that. If things are working for Fields, if the offensive line does its job and his first read's open, he'll be able to hit it. If there's a running lane there, he'll be able to take it. But Fields is not a guy who can really transcend adversity. And that's something we knew going in. And if you look at those 5 passes, I saw a couple where maybe he predetermined to read to Garrett Wilson. There was one where he had a bad snap. There were a couple where he was under pressure. These are the things we knew Justin Fields was going to struggle with going in. Week 1 against Green Bay, everything looked really good. And Fields played pretty well. Week 2, things did not, things were not so good. The surroundings were not so great for Fields, and he struggled. This is not new information. Even within these 5 passes, we saw the same Justin Fields that's been around his entire career. And the job for the Jets is to put Fields in situations where he'll be in good shape, and accentuate his positives. Put him in situations where you can utilize his legs and run. Draw up plays where his first read will be open often, and hopefully get good pass protection out of the offensive line. We know Justin Fields is not going to be a superstar this year. He was the best of a lot of bad options the Jets had. And that's why they signed him. There were no great options. So I don't understand the point of getting all over Fields for those 5 passes. Because I'm not saying that they were good, but I also don't think that anything that happened is a major surprise. I think we knew what Fields' flaws were going in, and the Jets just have to try and work around them. If there was a better option, the Jets would have signed him. We knew that Fields was a flawed option. So I don't understand the hysteria over this performance other than it's preseason and it's Justin Fields and we have to obsess over the quarterback as fans. It's not a big deal. It showed you some of the limitations Justin Fields had, of course, but we already knew that those limitations existed, so it's not like we're covering new ground. There were some things I think we learned about the Jets in this game, however. And ahead here on the Locked On Jets podcast, we'll talk about some big takeaways the Jets should have from this game, some things they need to work on, and how they might want to approach the third preseason game. All that ahead here on this Monday edition of Locked On Jets. This episode is brought to you by BetterHelp. These days, it feels like there's advice for everything: cold plunges, gratitude journals, screen detoxes. But how do you know what actually works for you? With so much information online about mental health and wellness, it can be overwhelming to figure out what's true and what will actually help. That's where talking to a licensed therapist through BetterHelp can make all the difference. You get real personalized guidance instead of just guessing based on something you saw on social media. With over 30,000 therapists, BetterHelp is the world's largest online therapy platform, serving more than 5 million people. It's easy to fit into your schedule. Just a click to connect, and you can even switch therapists anytime if you need to. Talk it out with BetterHelp. Our listeners get 10% off their first month at betterhelp.com/lockedon. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. Thank you so much for making Locked On Jets your first listener, first watch every day. And a big shout out to you everydayers. This is a daily podcast covering the New York Jets with new episodes each day through the week, Monday through Friday. It was not pretty Saturday night at MetLife Stadium for the New York Jets. The Giants beat the Jets 31-12 in the annual preseason game between the two teams from New York. What did we learn from this game? I think there actually were a couple of takeaways. And I'm going to start on the offensive line. It was a real struggle for Armand Bamboo. And we all know that Bamboo is a guy with a lot of potential. And the first game against Green Bay, he looked pretty good. He did not allow a pressure in 10 pass blocking snaps. This game, if you were watching him, just the eyeball tests, he had issues. And it's not a huge surprise because while the New York Giants may not have the most talented roster in the league, one area where they are loaded with talent is the defensive line. It's one of the reasons I like seeing the Jets play their starters in this game is I feel like this game would be a good measuring stick because the Giants have so many talented pass rushers on their roster. And you saw Bamboo kind of struggle. Now, week one against Green Bay, one of the things I said was he did not look overwhelmed. Against the Giants, it was a tougher test, and I don't know that he came out of it all that well. Now, does this mean we should panic about Armand Bamboo? Well, of course not. And I could bring up a number of the points I discussed in the first segment about a handful of snaps, but also this was his second preseason game of his rookie season. There's absolutely no reason to panic. What I do think is sometimes the offensive line is a spot where just a couple of reps can give you kind of a good barometer about where a player is right now. So through 2 weeks of the preseason, it seems like Bamboo is not completely overwhelmed. Not a guy the Jets should think about taking out of the starting line because that Green Bay game was there. He looked pretty solid in that. Against higher level competition, though, it's a little bit tougher for him right now, and that's natural. Offensive line, particularly tackle, is one of the toughest places to transition to the NFL. You look across the league each year, maybe there's like one rookie tackle who steps in and is ready to go on day one. There's a lot of struggles, even among guys who become good players. The Giants have a tackle, Andrew Thomas, who became one of the top tackles in the league. He struggled his rookie year. I could go down the list. Olu Fashanu was a good example last year where his play got stronger near the end of the year. But when he played early in the season, he looked overwhelmed. And I know some people have said, well, it's because he wasn't playing left tackle, which is his natural position. Fair enough. But I just think physically he wasn't there on day one. But, I think during the season, maybe he got some weight training. Maybe he started preparing. He got better as the season moved along. I think with the Jets is, what are you going to do? Are you going to bench Bamboo and put Chukwuma Okorafor in there? Well, I don't think Okorafor is going to be any better than Bamboo. I think with Bamboo, you hope that he slowly starts to learn the game. He slowly starts to develop. And I think the game reps will be helpful for him going forward. But I think what he showed is he's not there yet against the truly great pass rushers. And the reason this is significant is the Jets are facing TJ Watt week one. And TJ Watt almost exclusively lines up over the right tackle. Now, you go back a year ago, there was a game the Jets played in Pittsburgh on Sunday Night Football, which was a horrendous game by the Jets. You can go back and listen to my podcast after that one. I said the Jets were the worst team money could buy after that game. It was just a very unenjoyable Sunday night in Pittsburgh. One of the few positive aspects for that game from the Jets was that they really did neutralize TJ Watt. They did a fantastic job on TJ Watt. And they did it by double teaming him on practically every snap. I think there was an expression used during the game, during the broadcast, that Todd Downing's plan was to have 4 hands on Watt on every play, two guys blocking him. But I think what this game showed is that Armand Bamboo should not be left on an island against TJ Watt in week one. And I wasn't really expecting that to be the case anyway, because again, he is a rookie. Sometimes common sense must prevail. And I think any rookie game one against TJ Watt, you're going to want to give him a lot of help. But I think this game reinforced that. And I think it's one of the reasons it's good the Jets play their starters. You can start to evaluate this stuff. The Jets also need to tighten up the back of the defense. They gave up a long touchdown pass, the first team defense. Andre Cisco just handled it horribly. And of course, it's that time of year. I spend every single year, it feels like I praise the Jets for bringing in some veteran safety. I say he's going to be good. He goes out there and makes me look like a fool. And Andre Cisco is the latest in that long line of Jet safeties. After Chuck Clark last year, I spent 2 years talking up Chuck Clark, and he ended up doing pretty much nothing for the Jets. Andre Cisco, I hope he straightens things out. But a really ugly rep for the Jets in the first quarter of that game. They gave up a long touchdown. They did not handle it well. And one of the things I've talked about heading into these preseason games is part of the reason I think you play the starters is you want to figure out what needs to be fixed. You want to be, because if that happens week one against the Pittsburgh Steelers, it could cost the Jets a game. And week one, the game's counted in the standings. Week two of the preseason, the game doesn't count in the standings. So if you mess up, you can go back to the film. You can look at how maybe you mess up, maybe things didn't go well, and you can correct them. You can fix them. So we know the Jets in the back of the defense need some work after that game, because that was horrendous. And again, Andre Cisco, I think, was the culprit. And Andre Cisco, of course, making me look bad after talking about what a good signing could be. Andre, please straighten it up. But I think bigger point here is we should see the starters play in the third game of the preseason. It's been interesting because it's kind of felt like league wide this year. Teams are going in a different direction with these preseason games. There was a long stretch where it felt like teams were just very, very reluctant to play their starters. And it feels like across the league, teams are kind of getting away from that. They're starting to see the value in having your starters play some in the exhibition season. Through the first two preseason games, the Jets starters have been on the field. They haven't seen a lot of time, which is a change from Robert Saleh, who typically did not play his starters at all in the preseason. I mean, I think there was the one Aaron Rodgers drive 2 years ago, or maybe it was two drives with Aaron Rodgers where the Jets scored a touchdown. But generally speaking, Robert Saleh was not a guy who played his starters much in preseason. Aaron Glenn's been different. And you may remember, if you're a longtime NFL fan, in the past, there used to be four exhibition games before they went to the 17th regular season game. It used to be 4 exhibition games, 16 regular season games. Now it's 3 and 17. But back during the 4-game exhibition season format, teams typically use the third game as the dress rehearsal, where they actually game planned it for it as though it was a regular season game. They spent the week practicing as though they were preparing for a regular season game, and they ended up playing the starters into the third quarter. The theory behind it was that you wanted the starters to focus as though it's a regular season game. It was called like the dress rehearsal, and that included warming up and playing after halftime. I would not object to the Jets doing something like that against the Philadelphia Eagles this coming week. Now, it's a little tough because this is your last chance to evaluate players at the back of the roster. So you would be sacrificing that. I mean, typically this last preseason game is, we call it the backup bowl, where the starters don't really play that much because you're really focused on those last couple, who makes the 53-man roster, who are your practice squad candidates. So there would be some cost to that, but I think the Jets have some stuff to work out. The back end of the defense, trying to figure out, how to make this offense work. I think it would be good for the Jets to give their starters some pretty extensive playing time in this game and start focusing on the regular season and getting this team ready to go week one when they take on the Pittsburgh Steelers. So I think that's another takeaway from this game. Now, during the Locked On Jets podcast, we'll talk about some of the backups. We'll talk about some takeaways. I do think that there are perhaps 2 roster battle spots that Saturday night could have an impact on. And one I'm not so sure about, but it's possible. And we'll talk about that as we continue here on this Monday edition of Locked On Jets. This episode is presented by Yahoo Fantasy. It's the best time of year. NFL kickoff is almost here, and that means fantasy football season's back in full swing. And this year, Yahoo Fantasy is turning things up with a fantasy football experience like never before. This year, me and Locked On Jets are playing on Yahoo Fantasy, and you should too, whether you're a first-timer or a veteran making your millionth league. I played Yahoo Fantasy for over 20 years, and the updates they're rolling out this month are wild, and I mean that in the best way. To celebrate 28 years of Yahoo Fantasy greatness, Yahoo Fantasy is dropping 28 big new features over 28 days throughout August. And to kick it off, they've just dropped the Yahoo Fantasy Guillotine Leagues, a killer new way to make playing Yahoo Fantasy football fun, where the lowest scoring team gets eliminated each week until there's one team left standing. With the season right around the corner, now's the time to get your league together and give this new mode a try. If you're more into the classics, you can still play head-to-head in private leagues or join a public league. Stay tuned for more killer announcements and start playing Yahoo Fantasy Football now at yahoofantasy.com/LockedOnNFL. This is the Locked On Jets podcast here on this Monday. Jets did not have a good night on Saturday night against the New York Giants. They were defeated 31-12. Jets preseason record, for whatever little that matters, not much, falls to 1-1. Part of preseason is about evaluating who makes the roster and who doesn't. And I do think there were a couple of roster battles where the trajectory may have changed based on what happened on Saturday night. And I'm going to start by talking about the running back position. And really, up until Saturday night, I thought Donovan Edwards, the undrafted rookie out of Michigan, had a good chance of making the roster. I'm not as convinced of that anymore because of the play of Kene Nwangwu. And Nwangwu was a guy who I mentioned last year. He had a huge game on special teams against the Seattle Seahawks. I was actually at that game, and at the time I referred to him as my new favorite player. The first player who got the designation of being my favorite player since Eddie Pinheiro. I loved what Nwangwu did in that game. But I was a little skeptical of his chances to make the roster because it had to come as a kickoff returner. It seemed like there was going to be a really crowded competition at the return spot. And I didn't think there was any guarantee Nwangwu would get it. And part of it is that you don't really know who the effective returners are going to be based on what happens in the training camp practices. You hear people talking about who's winning the return competition in camp. Well, you ever watch one of those practices? The returns are all happening at half speed. I'm not even sure there's a ton of utility to practicing the returns outside of like securing the catch at practice because guys aren't really playing as they will in games. So you really have to evaluate the competition for the return game based on what happens in the preseason games. Well, Nwangwu broke a 38-yard return. But beyond that, he actually played pretty effectively as a running back. He had 31 yards on 6 carries. And perhaps just as importantly, he had an excellent blitz pickup in the second half. And I think when you're talking about who gets the last running back spot, that stuff can matter. We don't really give pass blocking its due at the running back position, but that matters to a lot of coaches. Edwards did not have as good of a game. Now, I actually would argue that Edwards' game performance was not as bad as the stat line would indicate. It was really a pretty bad stat line for Edwards. He only had 21 yards on 8 carries, but I think that was a little skewed because he got a couple short yardage carries, which the objective was to pick up the first down, just pick up a couple yards. And then there was a play or two where the offensive line just didn't block and he had no shot in the backfield. I think the issue more with Edwards is the special teams ability of Nwangwu plus his showing some ability at the running back position. It could mean the difference between a roster spot and a practice squad spot for Edwards. I think that the running back spot has seen a pretty significant change based on that game. I'm not sure the same is true at cornerback, but I did notice one thing, and it's about this to me is a roster battle between two recent Jets late round picks, Jarek Bernard-Converse, who was a pick in 2023, and Quantez Stiggers, who was a pick last year. Week 1 against Green Bay, I called Stiggers like one of my big winners because he looked excellent on special teams. Bernard-Converse was a healthy scratch for that first preseason game. The Jets did not play him. The Jets announced he was not going to be active for that game, and there was no known injury, so it didn't sound like the Jets were interested in playing him. Bernard-Converse had a really good game. He played very strong. He was good in coverage. The Giants went after him a couple times. He did not give up much. He also made a great one-on-one tackle on the goal line to prevent a touchdown. Stiggers struggled. Stiggers was beaten in coverage quite a bit. And Stiggers did have one interception, but it was kind of like gift wrap to him. It was an errant throw by Russell Wilson. There was a miscommunication. Wilson thought his receiver was going to cut outside. The receiver cut inside. So it was just kind of lofted up at Stiggers. It was almost like catching a punt. Credit to Stiggers for not dropping it because corners do drop easy interceptions all the time, but it wasn't like Stiggers, did a great job baiting a bad throw. It was just an errant throw based on a preseason miscommunication. My hunch is still that special teams ability is going to carry the day when we talk about the last couple roster spots. So my guess would be Stiggers still gets that spot over Bernard-Converse, but I think Stiggers could have closed the discussion with a strong performance on defense. Because if you can be a quality backup at your natural position and play special teams well, there's really no debate. if it's a debate between a guy who plays his natural position well versus a guy who plays special teams well, I still think special teams is going to be the deciding factor because those guys will actually play on special teams, whereas you hope they won't play at the natural position. But I do think it's at least a discussion that may not have been there had Stickers played well at corner. In the third spot, I'm not sure anything changed here, but that number 3 quarterback spot between Adrian Martinez and Brady Cook. I thought Cook looked much more comfortable in this game, and his numbers were pretty good. Week 1, Cook really struggled. He did not look comfortable back there. In this game, Cook went 6 of 11 for 74 yards. More than anything, I just think he looked much calmer in the pocket. I didn't think Martinez played poorly. I thought there were a couple of plays Martinez's receivers could have made that would have helped his stat line out. My hunch is still that Martinez is ahead of Cook on the depth chart. It could be a possibility the Jets keep both of these guys. In today's NFL, it's actually pretty logical to keep 3 quarterbacks on your team because the league now allows you to activate a bonus player each week as long as he's a quarterback. He's your number 3 quarterback, and he's only allowed to play if your top 2 quarterbacks get hurt. So if the league's allowing you to activate a bonus player each week, and it happens to be at the quarterback position, I don't see why you wouldn't keep a number 3 quarterback. And it's possible, Cook eventually goes to the practice squad and, kind of works on developing his game. The thing with Cook is I'm still not convinced he's got enough zip on his passes to be an NFL player. Cook seemed pretty decent processing back there in the pocket. I'm not totally convinced, though, that he's got the physical tools, but I think this was a step forward. And I think that you can now maybe justify a practice squad spot for Brady Cook in a way that perhaps you couldn't have a week ago when he was struggling so much against the Green Bay Packers. And, I'm a kind of a believer that you have as many arms on your team as possible because you don't know who's going to hit. You don't know, when you're going to strike gold. So I think there's some value in adding as many lottery tickets as you can to your quarterback room. And, I think that this was a good performance by Brady Cook. I don't know if it was enough to overtake Martinez, but I thought it was enough to perhaps get Cook in discussion for a practice squad spot if you keep 3 quarterbacks on the active roster. Anyway, that's all for today's episode. This has been the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day is our motto. As always, if you enjoy the show, hit the subscribe button where you're watching or listening so that you'll never miss an episode. If you enjoy the show and are listening on a podcast source, give it a 5-star review. And if you're watching on YouTube and enjoy the show, give this episode a big thumbs up. It helps us out. It helps other Jets fans find the podcast. Enjoy your Monday, everybody. We'll be back tomorrow to talk more Jets.